England is a country that most people think they know. The green fields, the country pubs, the hedgerows, the drizzle, the polite conversations about the weather that serve as a substitute for actually saying anything meaningful. It is a country that markets itself as pleasant, predictable, and profoundly ordinary, and for the most part, it succeeds. But beneath that surface of manicured ordinariness, in the gaps between the familiar landmarks and the well-trodden tourist trails, there are places so strange, so unexpected, and so thoroughly unlikely that encountering them for the first time feels less like visiting a new destination and more like discovering that the country you thought you lived in has been keeping secrets from you. Today I am taking you to 7 of those places. 7 locations in England that look like they belong in a different country, a different century, or a different dimension entirely. Come on, subscribe. Today I'm going to show you the England that England does not want you to see. Number 7. The Finsbury Park Underground Reservoir, London. Beneath the joggers, the dog walkers, the picnickers, and the Sunday afternoon strollers of Finsbury Park in North London, there is a cathedral. Not a cathedral dedicated to God or to any recognisable religion, but a cathedral dedicated to water, built by the Victorians in 1868 and abandoned by the Water Board over a century later because they were worried the roof might collapse and flood the park above. The Finsbury Park Underground Reservoir, also known as the Hornsey Wood Reservoir, is a vast subterranean chamber supported by hundreds of brick columns arranged in rows that stretch away into the darkness in every direction, creating an effect that is simultaneously industrial and ecclesiastical, as though someone had taken a Byzantine basilica, stripped it of all decoration, built it underground, and then filled it with 5 million gallons of Thames water. The reservoir was constructed by the East London Waterworks Company and designed to store water that had been pumped 19 miles across London from filtration works at Sunbury near Feltham, through a 36-inch main that ran beneath the streets of the capital. For more than a century, the reservoir did its job quietly and invisibly, storing clean water beneath a park where Londoners went to enjoy the fresh air, blissfully unaware that directly beneath their feet lay a structure that would not have looked out of place in an Italian Renaissance painting. The brick columns that support the roof are masterpieces of Victorian engineering, each one hand-built to precise specifications, arranged in a grid pattern that creates perspectives so deep and so symmetrical that photographers who have managed to gain access describe the experience as being inside a real-life Escher drawing. The reservoir was decommissioned when structural surveys revealed concerns about the integrity of the Victorian brickwork, and it has been sealed and largely forgotten ever since. Periodically, proposals are made to convert the space into a public venue, a wine cellar, a data centre, or an underground swimming pool. But none has progressed beyond the planning stage. Largely because the cost of making the structure safe for public access is estimated at several £1 million, which is rather more than the local council has lying around in its petty cash drawer. In the meantime, the reservoir sits beneath the park, like a secret that the city is keeping from itself. A space so beautiful and so improbable that people who learn about it for the first time refuse to believe that it exists until they see the photographs. And even then, many assume they have been digitally altered. They have not. Beneath Finsbury Park, there is a cathedral made of brick, built to hold water, and it is one of the most extraordinary hidden spaces in Europe. The Victorians had a talent for infrastructure that bordered on the obsessive. They did not merely build things that worked, and they built things that worked and that looked magnificent while doing so, as though the function of an object was merely the excuse for making something beautiful. The Finsbury Park Reservoir is a perfect example of this philosophy. Nobody would ever see it. Nobody was supposed to see it. It was a water tank, hidden underground, in the dark, full of water. And yet the engineers who designed it built it with the same care, the same precision, and the same attention to aesthetic detail that they would have applied to a bridge, a railway station, or a cathedral above ground. The columns are evenly spaced, the arches are perfectly proportioned, and the overall effect is one of order, elegance, and permanence. It is the most beautiful room in London that nobody has ever been in. And the fact that it exists beneath a park where people go to play football and walk their labradoodles is, to my mind, one of the most delightful facts about the capital. Number 6. the buried Victorian street beneath Bristol. In the Lawrence Hill area of Bristol, beneath the modern roads and buildings that most residents walk across every day without a second thought, there is a complete Victorian street that was paved over and forgotten about for more than a century. The street, which runs beneath the current ground level, was buried when the area was redeveloped in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and its existence passed into local legend, told and retold in pubs and barbershops as the kind of story that sounds too good to be true. There was even a tale of a man who had drunkenly stumbled down a hole on his way home from the pub and found himself suddenly and inexplicably transported back to Victorian England, which he initially attributed to the quality of the beer. In 1999, a local man named Dave Stevenson decided to investigate the rumours. Stevenson had grown up hearing stories about the buried street and had always wondered whether there was any truth to them. Armed with a torch and the kind of stubbornness that is either admirable or foolhardy depending on the outcome, he found an access point and descended beneath the modern street to discover that the stories were in fact entirely true. Below the surface, he found a preserved Victorian road surface, complete with cobblestones, the curbstones and the remnants of shop fronts and house facades that had been sealed beneath the new construction and left undisturbed for over 100 years. The buried street is not officially open to the public, and accessing it requires permissions that are not easily obtained, but the knowledge that it exists, that beneath the mundane surface of a Bristol neighbourhood, there is a perfectly preserved fragment of the 19th century sitting in the dark, adds a layer of historical depth to the city that most visitors never suspect. Bristol is a city that has always had a complicated relationship with its past, from its role in the slave trade to its position as one of the great ports of the British Empire. The existence of a buried street that the city literally built over and forgot about feels like a metaphor for the way cities deal with histories they would rather not confront. The Victorians who walked this street, who shopped in these shops, who lived in these houses, are gone. But the street they walked on is still there, buried but not destroyed, hidden but not lost, waiting beneath the feet of people who have no idea it exists. The buried street beneath Lawrence Hill is not unique. Cities across England have been built and rebuilt on top of themselves for centuries, and fragments of earlier streets, buildings and infrastructure survive beneath the modern surface in quantities that would astonish most people. In London, Roman roads lie beneath medieval foundations, which lie beneath Georgian basements, which lie beneath Victorian sewers, which lie beneath modern tube tunnels, creating a layered archaeology that extends down through 2,000 years of continuous occupation. But what makes the Bristol street special is not its age or its importance, but its completeness. This is not a foundation or a fragment, it is a street, with its cobbles, its curbs and its shop fronts, preserved beneath a later construction like a fly in amber, and the fact that it was rediscovered not by professional archaeologists, but by a local man with a torch, and a curiosity that refused to be satisfied by hearsay makes the story even better. Number 5. Jaywick, Essex. On the coast of Essex, a few miles west of Clacton-on-Sea, there is a settlement that has been described as the most deprived neighbourhood in England, and that looks, from certain angles and in certain lights, less like an English seaside town and more like a shanty town in a developing country. Jaywick was built in the 1920s and 30s as a holiday resort, a collection of small chalets and bungalows designed to provide affordable seaside accommodation for working-class Londoners who wanted a week by the sea without spending a fortune. The plots were cheap, the buildings were basic and the infrastructure was minimal, which was fine when the chalets were used for holidays but became considerably less fine when people started living in them permanently. Over the decades, Jaywick evolved from a seasonal holiday camp into a permanent residential community, but the infrastructure never caught up. The roads are narrow and potholed, many of the properties are in poor condition, and the sea defences that protect the settlement from flooding are a source of constant anxiety for residents who remember the North Sea flood of 1953, which inundated Jaywick and killed 37 people. The area has been ranked as the most deprived neighbourhood in England in successive government indices of deprivation, a distinction that the residents find neither surprising nor helpful, because being told that you live in the most deprived place in England does nothing to fix the roads, repair the seawall, or provide the services that the community needs. What makes Jaywick genuinely remarkable, beyond the statistics and the headlines, is the community itself. The people who live there are not passive victims of deprivation. They are resourceful, are resilient and fiercely protective of a place that the rest of the country has written off. There are community gardens, volunteer-run organisations, arts projects, and a spirit of mutual support that puts many wealthier communities to shame. The buildings may be ramshackle, the roads may be terrible, and the sea may be getting closer every year. But the people of Jaywick have a sense of belonging and a determination to survive. That is, in its own way, more impressive than anything you will find in the manicured suburbs of the home counties. Jaywick is the England that England would prefer you did not see, and for precisely that reason, it is one of the most important places to understand if you want to know what this country is really like. The settlement was never designed for permanent habitation, and the buildings reflect that origin. Many of the original chalets were built without proper foundations, without damp-proof courses, and without the kind of structural integrity that modern building regulations demand. Over the decades, some have been extended, improved, and made habitable, while others have deteriorated to the point where they are barely standing. The streetscape of Jaywick, with its patchwork of maintained and derelict properties, its hand-painted signs and its improvised repairs, has an aesthetic that is entirely its own, somewhere between seaside charm and urban decay, and the overall effect is both depressing and oddly compelling. The flooding of 1953, when the North Sea surged through the settlement's inadequate defences and killed 37 residents, remains the defining event in Jaywick's history. The memory of that night, when families woke to find their homes filling with freezing seawater, is still passed down through the community, and the question of whether the current sea defences are adequate to prevent a repeat is one that residents ask with a regularity that the local authority finds uncomfortable. The sea wall that protects Jaywick from the North Sea was rebuilt in 2010 at a cost of approximately £36 million, providing a level of protection that the Environment Agency considers sufficient for the foreseeable future. The residents, who have heard promises about sea defences before, tend to reserve judgment. What Jaywick teaches you, if you are willing to learn, is that deprivation is not the same as defeat. The people who live here have been written off by successive governments, lampooned by the media, and ignored by the tourists who drive past on the way to Clacton. And yet the community survives, adapts, and refuses to disappear, which is more than can be said for many of the more respectable English settlements that have lost their identity to chain stores, identikit housing developments, and the slow homogenization of modern life. Jaywick is messy, complicated, and sometimes uncomfortable to look at, but it is also authentic, human, and alive, and those qualities are rarer in modern England than most people would care to admit. Subscribe to prove that these videos actually help and actually make sense. Number 4. The Crooked Spire of Chesterfield, Derbyshire. In the market town of Chesterfield in Derbyshire, the Church of St. Mary and All Saints has a spire that is twisted. Not slightly, not subtly, and not in a way that you might notice if you squinted at it from the right angle. The spire is twisted by approximately 45 degrees and leans nearly 3 meters from its true center, creating a silhouette that looks like someone grabbed the top of the steeple and wrung it like a wet cloth. The Crooked Spire, as it is universally known, has been the defining landmark of Chesterfield for over 600 years, and the question of why it is crooked has generated more theories, legends, and arguments than any other architectural feature in Derbyshire, which is saying something for a county that also contains the house where Mary, Queen of Scots, was imprisoned. The most commonly accepted explanation is prosaic but fascinating. The spire was built in the 14th century using unseasoned timber covered in lead tiles, and as the timber dried and the lead expanded and contracted with changes in temperature, the structure warped. The south side of the spire, which receives more sunlight than the north side, expanded more than its counterpart, and over the centuries, this differential expansion caused the spire to twist in a clockwise direction. The process was gradual, almost imperceptible in any single generation, but cumulative over 600 years, The result is a spire that looks like it was designed by a medieval architect who had had one too many at the pub. The local legends are considerably more entertaining than the engineering explanation. One story holds that a virgin once entered the church to be married, and the spire was so astonished by the unprecedented event that it leaned over to look and has been leaning ever since, waiting for it to happen again. Another legend attributes the twist to the devil, who wrapped his tail around the spire while sitting on it to rest and accidentally bent it. A third theory, popular among those who enjoy conspiracy, suggests that the spire was deliberately built crooked as a test of the builder's skills, a demonstration of what medieval craftsmen could achieve when they were showing off. Whatever the reason, the crooked spire is one of the most genuinely extraordinary sights in England. It is visible from miles around, its twisted silhouette instantly recognizable against the sky, and it has become so central to Chesterfield's identity that the local football team is nicknamed the Spireates, and the town's coat of arms features the crooked spire prominently. And guided tours of the church include a climb up the interior of the spire, where visitors can see the twisted timbers from the inside and appreciate at close quarters just how dramatically the structure has deformed over the centuries. The climb involves 170 steps up a narrow spiral staircase, and at the top, looking through the gaps in the lead tiles at the Derbyshire countryside spread out below, the scale of the distortion becomes fully apparent. The timbers that support the spire are visibly curved, warped by 600 years of differential expansion, and the lead tiles on the outside are buckled and stretched in ways that make structural engineers wince. The fact that the spire has not collapsed under the accumulated strain of its own distortion is a tribute to the quality of the original medieval craftsmanship and to the periodic maintenance that has been carried out over the centuries to prevent the twist from progressing beyond the point of no return. The church itself, aside from the famous spire, is a magnificent building that dates from the 13th century and that contains some of the finest medieval stonework in Derbyshire. The interior is spacious and light, with elegant arcades, carved capitals, and stained glass that spans several centuries. But nobody comes to the Church of St. Mary and All Saints for the stained glass. They come for the spire, and the spire delivers. It is one of those places where the reality exceeds the expectation, where the photographs you have seen do not prepare you for the visceral impact of standing beneath a structure that is so obviously, so spectacularly, so gloriously wrong. The spire is wrong. It should not twist. It should not lean. It should not look like that. And yet it does, and it has done for 600 years, and it will continue to do so for as long as the timber holds and the lead does not melt, and the people of Chesterfield continue to repair the building that defines their town. Number 3. Mannequin Hall, Lincolnshire. In a warehouse on Brant Road in the village of Fulbeck in Lincolnshire, there is a collection of approximately 100,000 mannequins, prosthetic limbs, body parts and anatomical models that has been described as the most unsettling tourist attraction in England, and that once visited, I cannot be unvisited. Mannequin Hall is the creation of a family business that has been supplying mannequins and display figures to the retail industry for decades. And the warehouse where the surplus stock is stored has evolved over the years into a vast, labyrinthine collection of disembodied heads, torsos, arms and legs arranged in displays that range from the mildly artistic to the deeply disturbing. The centerpiece of the collection is a 20-foot mountain made entirely from body parts, a towering heap of plastic limbs and torsos that rises from the warehouse floor like some kind of anatomical Everest. Around it, mannequin figures are arranged in tableaux that depict scenes from history, mythology, and the fevered imagination of whoever is responsible for the displays. And the overall effect is somewhere between a museum, a nightmare, and a very specific kind of art installation that you would not want to encounter after dark. The warehouse also serves as a popular filming location for horror films and music videos, which is entirely understandable given that the interior looks like the set of a horror film that the set designers abandoned because it was too disturbing even for them. For visitors with a strong stomach and a taste for the bizarre, Mannequin Hall offers what it calls a drive-through body part heist, in which, for approximately £50, you can fill your car boot with as many mannequin limbs and heads as you can fit and take them home for whatever purpose you might have in mind. The fact that this service exists, that there is a business model built around selling surplus body parts from the boot of your car, where he tells you everything you need to know about the kind of place this is and the kind of country that produces it. Mannequin Hall is open to visitors by appointment, and the special Halloween events, which involve the very brave attempting to spend the night in the warehouse surrounded by 100,000 mannequins in the dark, are precisely as terrifying as they sound. The warehouse is located in one of the most peaceful and picturesque parts of rural Lincolnshire, which makes the contrast between the gentle English countryside outside and the apocalyptic landscape of dismembered plastic bodies inside all the more jarring. You drive through villages with thatched cottages and duck ponds, past fields of wheat and rapeseed, through landscape that could illustrate a tin of shortbread biscuits, and then you arrive at a warehouse that looks like a normal agricultural building from the outside and that, from the inside, looks like the aftermath of an event that would make the evening news in most countries. Mannequin Hall is not for everyone. It is not for most people, but for those who have a taste for the deeply peculiar, for places that exist at the intersection of commerce, art and pure, distilled strangeness. It is a destination that has no equivalent anywhere else in England, or indeed anywhere else on Earth. Number 2. The abandoned bottle kilns of Stoke-on-Trent, Staffordshire. In the city of Stoke-on-Trent, in the heart of what was once the pottery capital of the world, then there are approximately 47 surviving bottle kilns scattered across the urban landscape like the chimneys of a civilization that has packed up and moved somewhere cheaper. There were once 2,000 of these kilns, dominating the skyline of the potteries and belching smoke and fumes into the air in quantities that made the atmosphere of Stoke-on-Trent legendarily unpleasant, but that also produced the finest ceramics on the planet. The kilns, which take their name from their distinctive bottle shape, were used to fire pottery at temperatures high enough to vitrify the clay and create the finished product, and they were the essential technology behind an industry that made names like Wedgwood, Spode, Royal Doulton and Minton famous around the world. The Clean Air Act of 1956, which banned the use of coal-fired kilns in urban areas, effectively killed the traditional bottle kiln overnight. The pottery industry adapted by switching to electric and gas-fired tunnel kilns, but the bottle kilns themselves were surplus to requirements, and over the following decades, more than 1,900 of them were demolished. The 47 that survive are now listed buildings, protected by law from demolition, and they stand among the terraced houses, the retail parks, and the modern industrial units of Stoke-on-Trent, like monuments to an industry that defined the city for 2 centuries, and that left behind a landscape unlike anywhere else in England. The most impressive concentration of surviving kilns is at Gladstone Pottery Museum in Longton, where a complete Victorian pottery works has been preserved as a working museum. Visitors can see the kilns from the inside, understanding for the first time the sheer scale of these structures and the brutal conditions in which the potters worked, surrounded by intense heat, choking dust and fumes that shortened their lives by decades. The pottery industry made Stoke-on-Trent famous, and it also poisoned it, filling the air with lead dust and sulfur dioxide that caused respiratory disease on an epidemic scale, and that gave the city a life expectancy that was significantly lower than the national average throughout the Victorian period. The bottle kilns are monuments to that dual legacy, simultaneously the instruments of extraordinary artistic achievement and the tools of industrial destruction, and standing inside one today, and looking up at the circular opening at the top, where the smoke once poured into the Staffordshire sky, you feel both the grandeur and the grimness of the world that built them. The campaign to preserve the remaining kilns has been a constant struggle against the forces of redevelopment that would prefer to flatten them and build something profitable in their place. The fact that 47 survive is a testament to the determination of local heritage campaigners who understood that the kilns are not merely interesting buildings, but are the defining architectural feature of a city whose identity is inseparable from the industry that created it. Without the bottle kilns, Stoke-on-Trent is just another post-industrial English city. With them, it is a place that tells a story about labour, art, pollution, a decline and survival that is unique in the country and that deserves to be heard by everyone who uses a plate, a cup or a bowl, which, last time I checked, is everyone. The Gladstone Pottery Museum, where the largest concentration of surviving kilns can be found, is one of the finest industrial heritage museums in Britain. The demonstrations of traditional pottery techniques, including throwing, decorating and firing, give visitors a visceral understanding of the skills that made the potteries famous, and the recreated Victorian workshops, complete with period tools and materials, provide a level of immersion that few museums can match. The museum is open year-round, and admission is approximately £10 per adult, which is a remarkably modest price for an experience that will fundamentally change the way you think about the plate you eat your breakfast off every morning. Stoke-on-Trent may not be the most glamorous destination in England, but it is one of the most honest, a city that does not pretend to be something it is not, and that wears its industrial heritage with a pride that its more polished neighbours would do well to emulate. Number 1. The Red Sands Army Fort, Thames Estuary. And at number 1, a place that I have deliberately saved until last, because it is, in my considered opinion, the most visually extraordinary, the most historically significant, and the most thoroughly surreal structure in England that the majority of the population has never seen. The Red Sands Army Fort stands in the Thames Estuary. It's approximately 8 miles off the coast of Whitstable in Kent, and it consists of 7 interconnected towers standing on steel legs in the water, looking like nothing that has ever existed before or since, a cross between a science fiction film set, an oil rig, a war memorial, and a giant insect that has waded into the sea and decided to stay. The fort was built in 1943 as part of the Monsell Army Fort Programme, designed to defend the Thames Estuary from German air raids and mine-laying operations. Each of the 7 towers served a specific purpose. One was the control tower, others housed Bofors guns and radar equipment, and they were connected by steel walkways that allowed the crew to move between towers without descending to sea level. The towers were prefabricated on land, floated out to their position on barges and sunk into the sandbanks of the estuary. A feat of wartime engineering that was achieved in weeks and that has survived, with minimal maintenance, for over 80 years. After the war, the fort was decommissioned and abandoned by the military, and for several years in the 1960s, it was occupied by pirate radio stations, including Radio City, whose broadcasts of pop music to southeast England made the fort famous and infuriated the BBC in equal measure. The story of Radio City ended tragically when the station's financial backer, Reginald Calvert, was shot dead in a dispute with a rival broadcaster, a killing that led to the Marine Broadcasting Offences Act of 1967, and which effectively ended the era of pirate radio in Britain and forced the BBC to launch Radio 1 as a legal alternative. Since then, the Red Sands Fort has stood empty in the estuary, its towers slowly rusting, its walkways deteriorating, its gun platforms pointing at an enemy that no longer exists. The fort is not open to the public in any official capacity, but boat tours from Whitstable and Herne Bay take visitors close enough to appreciate the scale and the strangeness of the structure. Approaching the fort by boat on a grey morning, with the towers emerging from the mist like the legs of an enormous creature standing in the water, is an experience that makes you question whether you are still in England or whether you have somehow drifted into a parallel universe where the rules of architecture, geography and common sense no longer apply. The tours typically last around 3 hours and cost approximately £45 per person, which for the privilege of seeing one of the most extraordinary structures in England from close range is money well spent. The boat operators time the trips to coincide with favourable tides and weather conditions, and on a calm day, it is sometimes possible to get close enough to the towers to see the individual rivets in the steelwork and the rust patterns that have formed over 8 decades of exposure to the North Sea. Some tours include a circumnavigation of the entire fort, passing between the towers and along the walkways, and the sense of scale that this provides is genuinely awe-inspiring. Each tower rises approximately 20 metres above the waterline on steel legs that disappear into the grey-green water below, and the 7 towers arranged in their defensive pattern create a silhouette that is unlike anything else on the English coast, or for that matter, anywhere else in the world. The Red Sands Fort has been the subject of various preservation proposals over the years, including plans to convert it into a luxury hotel, an art gallery, and an offshore museum, but none has progressed beyond the concept stage because the cost of restoring a set of 80-year-old steel towers standing in salt water in the middle of the Thames estuary is, to put it mildly, substantial. The fort is listed by English Heritage as a scheduled monument, which means it cannot be demolished. But the listing does not come with any funding for maintenance, which means the structure continues to deteriorate year by year, each winter storm removing another piece of steelwork, each tide carrying away another fragment of the walkways. Marine engineers have warned that some of the towers could collapse within the next few decades if nothing is done, and the prospect of losing this extraordinary structure to the same sea it was built to defend adds an urgency to every visit that makes the experience both more precious and more melancholy. I chose the Red Sands Fort as my number 1 because it represents everything that I love about the hidden England. It is extraordinary but unknown. It is historically important but neglected. It is visually stunning but inaccessible. It was built with ingenuity and courage, and it is being destroyed by indifference and salt water. It stands in the Thames estuary like a question that England has been refusing to answer for 80 years. What do you do with something that is too important to demolish and too expensive to save? The answer, as always in this country, is nothing. You let it rust, you let it lean, you let it slowly disappear into the sea, and you hope that someone, somewhere, at some point, will decide that it matters enough to do something about it before it is too late. England is a country that does not believe in its own strangeness. It markets itself as the land of cream teas and cricket, of rolling hills and sensible shoes, of moderation and good manners and doing things properly. And for the most part, that image is accurate enough. But beneath the surface, in the places where the postcards do not reach and the tourist buses do not go, there is a different England. An England of buried streets and underwater cathedrals, of twisted spires and mannequin mountains, of abandoned pottery kilns and rusting sea forts and seaside settlements that the rest of the country pretends do not exist. This is the England that I have spent my life exploring, and it is, without question, more interesting, more complicated, and more beautiful than the version you will find in the guidebooks. I am an old man who has climbed too many twisted spires, walked too many buried streets, and taken too many boat trips to rusting military installations in the Thames estuary to pretend that I'm anything other than obsessed with the hidden corners of this country. And what I have learned from all that climbing and walking and sailing is that England is at its best when it is at its most unlikely, when it defies its own reputation for ordinariness and reveals itself to be the strangest, most eccentric, most surprising country on earth. The 7 places on this list are my proof. They exist, they are real, and every single one of them will make you look at England with entirely different eyes. A Victorian water cathedral beneath a London park, a buried street beneath Bristol, a seaside settlement that the rest of the country pretends does not exist, a medieval spire that has been twisting for 600 years, a warehouse full of 100,000 mannequins in rural Lincolnshire, the last surviving bottle kilns of the pottery capital of the world, and a collection of rusting towers standing on stilts in the Thames estuary, built to fight a war that ended 80 years ago and abandoned to the mercy of the North Sea. These are not the England of the tourist brochures. They are the England that exists in the margins, in the overlooked corners, in the places where the country reveals its true character, which is not polite and predictable at all, but wild, strange, damaged, resilient, and profoundly, irredeemably fascinating. See you in the next one.